17 days. That was how long it took for the life she had built to show her what it actually was. Celeste Renee Whitmore was sitting at the kitchen island at 6 in the morning, Nia warm and small against her chest, Juno making the soft, searching sounds of a baby deciding whether sleep was finished. The house was quiet the way houses get quiet when one person has stopped coming home and the rooms have begun adjusting to the absence. Outside, Los Angeles was doing what it always did, moving, indifferent, golden even at this hour, entirely unbothered by what was happening inside one Silver Lake kitchen. She had her phone in her free hand the way new mothers hold phones, like a lifeline, like a window. Like something to look at during the feedings that happen in the dark when the rest of the world is asleep and you are alone with two new people who need everything and a body that has just survived something enormous. She opened the news out of habit, scrolled without focus, and then stopped. The photograph took up half the screen. J1CO. Seoul. Black tie. He was standing the way he always stood in public, architectural, composed, taking up exactly the amount of space he had decided to take up and not 1 inch more. Beside him, a woman in champagne silk. Her hand was in the crook of his elbow. Her left hand carried a diamond that caught the light the way only a stone of significant size and deliberate cut catches light. The caption read, COJ1 and Fiancée Una Beck announced their engagement. A union years in the making. Years. Celeste read it once. She set the phone face down on the marble counter, marble she had selected herself, had specified in writing, had stood in a warehouse in Culver City and pressed her palm against until she found the one that felt right. She looked at Nia. Nia's eyes were closed. Her tiny mouth was working in the focused, ancient way of newborns who are completely unaware that the world has just rearranged itself around their mother. Celeste picked the phone back up. She read it again. Not because she hadn't understood it the first time. She had understood it completely the first time. She was a woman who read rooms for a living, who understood the language of arrangement and placement and the precise message that every deliberate choice sends to the person standing inside the space. She understood immediately what the photograph was saying, what the caption was confirming, what the diamond, commissioned months ago at minimum, was documenting without apology. She had not been a relationship. She had been an interval. A managed, useful, time-limited arrangement that had run its course and been concluded while she was still inside it, still believing, still designing a future in a house she had rebuilt with her own hands as a gift to a man who already knew she would not be keeping it. She set the phone down again. She looked at her son. She looked at her daughter. She breathed in through her nose and out through her mouth the way she breathed at the start of every new project, slowly, deliberately, taking the full measure of the space before she decided what it needed to become. Then she reached for a notepad. And she started designing. She had never been the kind of woman who disappeared into a relationship. That was the part that would take her the longest to make peace with, not the betrayal itself, but the precise and specific ways she had remained entirely herself throughout 3 years with J1CO and still had not seen it coming. She had kept her firm, kept her name on the door, kept the friendships, the morning runs, the habit of reading architectural journals in the bath on Sunday evenings. She had not shrunk. She had not performed. She had simply, genuinely, loved a man and believed, with the same evidence-based confidence she brought to every project, that what she was reading in him was real. She was very good at reading materials. Wood, stone, steel, light. The way a surface responds under pressure. The way a structure reveals its intentions over time if you know what to look for. She had read J1CO and she had seen discipline, depth, the particular exhaustion of a man carrying more than he was built to carry alone. She had seen someone who went still rather than loud when something moved him. Who remembered, 6 weeks after she mentioned it once, that she took her coffee with 1 sugar on the days she was stressed and none when she wasn't. Who had stood in the doorway of the first space she ever redesigned for him, his private office on Wilshire, before the company outgrew it, and said nothing for a long moment, and then looked at her with something in his eyes that she had, perhaps, made the mistake of naming. She had given him 3 years. She had given him the Silver Lake house, which she had taken from a cold, underlit, poorly proportioned shell and turned into the most thoughtful space she had ever designed, not because a client was paying her, but because she wanted him to have a home that understood him. Every material chosen for how it would feel, not how it would photograph. Every threshold considered. Every window placed to catch the specific quality of late afternoon light that she had noticed early in their relationship made him visibly exhale. She had given him her client network, piece by piece, because she believed in what he was building and she had access to the rooms where decisions were made, and sharing that access felt like partnership. She had given him the version of herself that still believed the distance in him was circumstance, that the silences were pressure, that the man she had assessed him to be was real and the coldness was simply the cost of the world he operated in. What she understood now, sitting with Reese's timeline not yet in her possession, but the photograph already burning a hole in the counter beside her notepad, was that she had been reading the right material with the wrong question. She had been asking, what is this person capable of becoming? She should have been asking, what has this person already decided? The question she could not yet answer, the one that sat at the bottom of every thought like sediment, was not what he had done. She understood what he had done. The question was when he had known she was temporary, and whether any single moment between them had been real in the way she had experienced it as real, or whether she had been, the entire time, the only one in the room who wasn't performing. She didn't have the answer yet, but she wrote the question down, because she had learned a long time ago that the questions you write down are the ones you eventually stop being afraid to answer. He had arrived at 11:17 in the evening. Celeste knew the exact time because she had looked at the clock on the wall when she heard his footsteps in the corridor, the particular, measured sound of J1CO moving through a space, always deliberate. Always the footsteps of a man who had decided exactly where he was going before he started moving. She had been awake for 19 hours by then. Her body felt like something that had been taken apart and reassembled by people working from a description rather than a diagram. Priya was asleep in the chair by the window. Dorian had just stepped out to get coffee from the machine down the hall, which meant the room was quiet in the specific way that allowed her to hear everything. The twins had been born at 2:43 and 2:51 that afternoon. 6 weeks early. Small enough that the NICU team had hovered in the first hour with the focused, careful energy of people who were not alarmed but were not yet ready to stop watching. By evening they had been cleared, small but breathing well, eating, present in the world with the stubborn, unannounced determination of two people who had decided to arrive on their own schedule regardless of what anyone had planned. Celeste had been the one to name them. Alone in the delivery room with a nurse who had held her hand through the final hour and a doctor who spoke in the calm, consistent tone of someone who understood that a woman in labor needed information, not performance. She had known the names already, had known them for weeks, but she had waited, some quiet part of her waiting for J1 to be there when she said them aloud for the first time. He wasn't there. So she said them to Priya, who cried, and to Dorian, who pressed his mouth flat and nodded in the way of a man holding something large and complicated very still inside his chest. When J1 walked in at 11:17, Nia and Juno were asleep in the bassinet beside her bed. He stopped at the door first. That was the thing she would return to later. In the quiet accounting of the evening, he stopped at the door and looked at the room before he looked at her. Not with wonder. Not with the overwhelmed stillness of a man encountering something that has undone him. With the particular, rapid assessment of someone calculating the distance between where they were standing and where they needed to be. He crossed to her. He kissed her forehead. He said, "You did well," which was a thing he said to someone who had completed a task. She told herself it was the shock of it. The enormity. She told herself men arrived at these moments differently, and that what looked like distance was actually the way he processed things he didn't have language for. She watched him look at the twins. He stood at the edge of the bassinet for perhaps 45 seconds. His face was unreadable in the way his face was often unreadable, which she had spent 3 years interpreting as depth and would now understand was simply the practiced blankness of a man keeping two lives from touching each other. He did not pick them up. She waited. She thought he was working up to it, the way some people stand at the edge of cold water before they go in. But he never went in. He straightened. He told her he had a flight at 6 and needed to be at the hotel by 2. He told her Dorian could reach him if anything changed. He said the words anything changed about his newborn children, and she heard them and filed them somewhere she wouldn't look at directly for another 17 days. He was gone by midnight. 40 minutes, door to door. She lay in the hospital bed after he left, and she listened to Nia breathe and Juno breathe and Priya breathe in the chair, and she looked at the ceiling, and she told herself the story she needed to tell herself to get through the night, that he was overwhelmed, that the world he operated in made tenderness expensive, that the man who had remembered her coffee order was still in there somewhere beneath the weight of whatever was pulling him back to Seoul at 6 in the morning. She told herself that story for 17 more days. Then she saw the photograph. And she understood that the thing wrong in his eyes that night had not been overwhelm. It had not been fear or grief or the speechless love of a man who didn't know how to say what he felt. It had been relief. The particular, quiet relief of a man who has fulfilled an obligation and can now return to his real life. She had read the material correctly. She had just named it wrong. She did not call anyone for the first 2 hours. That was the part Priya would not understand later. Not the calm, not the notepad, but the 2 hours of silence in which Celeste sat with the photograph and did not reach for anyone. She made herself a second cup of coffee. She fed Juno when he woke and then settled him back and sat at the island in the gray early morning and looked at the image on her phone with the focused, unblinking attention she gave to every structure she was trying to fully understand before she decided what to do with it. Because that was the thing about Celeste Renee Whitmore. She did not respond to spaces before she had read them. She had walked away from commissions, good ones, well-paying ones, because the client wanted an answer before she had finished looking. She needed to see the whole thing first. The proportions. The light. The weight distribution. What was holding what up and what was quietly, structurally failing. So she looked at the photograph and she read it the way she read every room she walked into. The ring first. She had an eye for material and scale that was essentially involuntary. She could not look at a stone of that cut and size without automatically calculating the lead time. A diamond like that was not purchased and set in weeks. That ring had been in design and commission for a minimum of 4 months. She did the arithmetic without wanting to. 4 months ago, she had been 6 months pregnant. She had been in their Silver Lake house. In the kitchen she had redesigned with the open shelving he said he liked, cooking dinner on a Tuesday evening while he sat at the island and read something on his phone and said, without looking up, that he thought they should talk about the future after the babies came. After the babies came. She moved to the body language. Jaewon and Yoona stood together with the ease of two people who had been in rooms together long enough to stop performing their proximity. It was not the careful, deliberate closeness of a new couple. It was the relaxed, unconsidered contact of familiarity. Her hand in the crook of his elbow had the weight of habit. He was not holding himself away from her the way he sometimes held himself away from things he hadn't yet decided to trust. He was simply standing beside her the way you stand beside something that has been yours long enough that you've stopped thinking about it. That was the detail that cost the most to look at directly. Then she read the guest list. The gala had been covered thoroughly, multiple outlets, multiple photographs. She found the full guest documentation with 3 searches. And there, moving through the names with the same methodical attention she had given everything else, she found them. 3 of them. Clients she had brought to the firm herself. A tech founder whose Malibu compound she had spent 14 months redesigning. A media executive whose Century City offices had won a regional award the previous spring. A retail developer whose entire West Coast portfolio had gone through her firm after Jaewon made the introduction at a dinner she had cooked in the Silver Lake house. 3 people who had sat in her meetings. Who had approved her invoices. Who had been in her professional life because she had been in Jaewon's personal life, and who had apparently been in the same room as his engagement announcement while their projects were still on her drafting table. They had known. Celeste set the phone down and looked at the window. The Los Angeles morning was doing its usual thing, arriving slowly and golden, indifferent to interior weather. She looked at the light for a moment. Then she picked up the notepad and wrote 3 names. She was still looking at those names when her phone lit up with Priya's contact photo. She answered on the second ring. She said 2 words, "Come over," and Priya, who had known Celeste for 11 years and understood that an underreaction from Celeste was the thing to be most concerned about, said she was already in the car. Dorian called from Virginia 12 minutes later. She did not ask how he knew because Dorian always knew. He had spent 8 years in military intelligence and had never fully stopped operating that way when it came to his sister. She heard him breathing on the line and then he said, "I'm booking a flight," not as a question. She said, "Don't do anything when you land." A pause. "Celeste." She said, "I mean it, Dorian." "Not yet." Another pause, longer. Then, "I'll call you when I'm boarding." She was already writing when Priya's key turned in the lock. Not a list of grievances. Not a record of pain. A map, the kind she drew at the beginning of every project, before a single decision was made of everything she knew, everything she needed to know, and every point at which one connected to the other. In the center of the page, she wrote one word and circled it twice. Architecture. Because someone had built something around her very carefully and over a very long time. And Celeste Whitmore's response to a structure she hadn't designed was always the same. First, understand exactly how it was built. Then decide what it deserved to become. He knocked at 7:45 in the morning, 4 days after the photograph. Celeste knew who it was before she opened the door, not because she was expecting him, but because she had learned over 3 years to recognize the particular quality of stillness that preceded Reese King's presence anywhere. He did not fidget. He did not shift weight. He simply existed in a space with the contained, patient energy of a man who had spent years making himself easy to overlook and had never once actually been overlooked by anyone paying real attention. She had paid attention. She always did. She opened the door. He was in civilian clothes, dark jeans, a plain gray jacket, nothing that marked him as belonging to the CO organization. He was not wearing the earpiece. His hands were at his sides, and he was holding a manila envelope with the careful, deliberate grip of someone who understood the weight of what was inside it. He said, "I'm not here on his behalf." She stepped back from the door and let him in. He didn't sit. He stood in the middle of her living room and looked at it the way people always looked at spaces Celeste had designed, with the slightly disoriented expression of someone whose nervous system had just been told, without words, that it was safe to exhale. She had not designed this room for comfort deliberately. She had designed it for herself, which meant it was honest, which was the only way she knew how to make a space genuinely restful. He placed the envelope on the coffee table. He did not open it. He looked at her and said, "How much do you want to know before I show you what's in there?" "All of it," she said. "From the beginning." He nodded once, as though that was the answer he had expected and had prepared for. He had been with the CO organization for 5 years. Before that, 7 years with Interpol's Financial Crimes Division, specifically tracking the movement of money through the kind of legitimate business structures that criminal organizations used as architecture. He had taken the position with J1's security team because the CO group had been a person of interest in 2 separate Interpol inquiries, and the intelligence community had wanted eyes inside. What he had found when he got there was both more and less than expected, more in terms of the family's internal machinery, less in terms of J1's direct culpability for the worst of it. He had stayed because leaving meant abandoning an intelligence asset. He had stayed too long. He understood that now. Then he opened the envelope. The first document was a legal memo on CO Group letterhead. 31 months old. She did the arithmetic immediately. The way she always did 31 months ago, she and J1 had been together for 5 months. She had just taken on her first CO-adjacent client. She had believed, at that point, that she was inside something real and growing. The memo outlined the framework for J1's forthcoming engagement to Unibec. It specified timeline, public relations strategy, family approval structure, and, she read this line 3 times, management protocol for existing personal entanglements. She was not named. She was referred to, in clean and neutral legal language, as the current Los Angeles arrangement. The second document was a timeline. Every major moment of her 3 years with J1 mapped in a single column on the left. Beside each entry, in a parallel column on the right, the corresponding internal CO family decision that had shaped it. His suggestion that she take on the Malibu compound client 3 weeks after a board meeting where West Coast expansion access was identified as a priority. His conversation about the future after the babies came the same week his mother's attorneys had begun preparing the engagement announcement framework. She read the whole thing. She did not rush. She turned each page with the steadiness of a woman who had decided before he arrived that she was going to be able to look at whatever this was and remain standing. The third thing in the envelope was not a document. It was a name, handwritten on a plain card in Reese's precise, minimal script. An attorney. The one who had drawn up both the engagement framework and the strategy for managing Celeste's exit from Jaewon's life. The one who, Reese explained quietly, had also drafted the language classifying her in Madame Seo's private correspondence. What language? She said. He held her gaze. She called you the asset. The room was very quiet. Outside, a car moved down the street. Juno made a small sound from the bedroom and settled back into sleep. Celeste looked at the card with the attorney's name on it. She looked at it for a long time. Then she placed it on top of the timeline on top of the memo, and she squared the edges of the 3 documents against each other the way she aligned drawings on her drafting table, precisely, without hurry, each corner meeting its corresponding corner exactly. Reese watched her do this. Then he said, "You were scheduled." "I'm sorry it took me this long to tell you." She looked up at him. "How long have you known?" "Long enough," he said, "that I stopped being able to call it watching and started having to call it participating." She nodded slowly. That, she understood. The particular guilt of someone who had given a structure the benefit of the doubt past the point where the doubt was reasonable. "I'll need copies of everything," she said. "Those are your copies," he said. "I kept mine." She picked up the envelope. She walked to the kitchen and placed it in the fireproof case she had bought the morning after the photograph, because Celeste Whitmore had known from the first moment she started writing on that notepad that whatever came next was going to require documentation. And documentation required protection. She closed the case. She came back to the living room. "Tell me about his mother," she said. "Tell me everything from the beginning." Reese sat down. And this time, he stayed. Hyunja Seo had never once in her life made a decision she hadn't already made 3 times in private first. That was the first thing Reese said when Celeste asked him to explain the woman. Not her biography, not her business record, not the public-facing version of Madame Seo that appeared in occasional Korean business profiles, gracious, reserved, the quietly formidable matriarch of a self-made dynasty. He started with her method. Because the method, he said, was the woman. Everything else was costume. Celeste listened the way she listened when a client was describing a space she hadn't yet seen, with her whole attention, building the picture in 3 dimensions as the words came, rotating it slowly in her mind, looking for the load-bearing points. Hyunja Seo had built the Seo Group from a single import logistics company her late husband had left her at 41, undercapitalized, poorly structured, and carrying 2 outstanding debts that most people in her position would have called unrecoverable. She had recovered them. In 7 years, she had turned the logistics company into a holding group with 6 subsidiary businesses and a real estate portfolio that spanned Seoul, Singapore, and the Western United States. She had done it with the particular intelligence of a woman who understood that the most durable structures were the ones nobody looked at directly, the ones that did their work from the inside, quietly, in the places where the visible architecture connected to the ground. She had also, from the moment Jaewon turned 22, been building him. Not raising him, that had happened already. Building him. Selecting his education, his associations, his public positioning, his private relationships, with the long-game precision of someone who understood that a man's value in the rooms that mattered was determined not just by what he had built, but by who he was seen standing beside. Yoona Baek had been selected when Jaewon was 29. Reese knew this because he had seen the original assessment document, an actual written assessment, prepared by a consultant Madame Seo retained for the purpose, evaluating 4 families across 3 criteria: financial alignment, social positioning, and what the document called generational compatibility. The Baek family had scored highest. The arrangement had been discussed between the two families' representatives before Jaewon knew Yuna's last name. He had met Celeste 4 months later. Celeste absorbed this without moving. Outside the window, a bird landed on the edge of the planter she had installed on the sill the first winter in the Silver Lake house, a small, deliberate thing, chosen because it caught morning light. She looked at it for a moment and then looked back at Reese. She let it continue for 3 years, Celeste said. It was not quite a question. She let it continue, Reese said carefully, because it was useful. He explained it plainly, the way she had asked him to explain everything, without cushioning, without the apologetic softening that people used when they were delivering information they felt guilty for carrying. Celeste's firm had access, not just to wealthy clients, but to the specific geography of Los Angeles power, the private residences, the professional spaces, the rooms where significant people made significant decisions in environments they believed were controlled and private. The CO Group's West Coast expansion had required exactly that kind of access. Client introductions that came through a trusted personal relationship rather than a business solicitation. Spaces redesigned by someone with Celeste's eye and Celeste's reputation that then became, quietly, environments the CO Group's associates moved through comfortably. She had been a door, Celeste understood. A beautifully designed, entirely unsuspecting door. She wrote something on her notepad. Reese waited. The correspondence, she said. The word she used. Asset, he said. It appears in 7 separate internal communications over a period of 14 months. Always in the context of timeline management. When to begin transitioning the West Coast relationships. When to begin preparing the engagement announcement. When the assets, he paused briefly, the first time his composure had shown any friction, when your continued proximity would become a liability rather than a resource. Celeste put her pen down. She looked at the ceiling for a moment, at the light fixture she had replaced 18 months ago, because the original one had cast the room in a yellowish light that made everything look slightly unwell. She had wanted the room to be honest. She had always wanted the spaces around her to be honest. Then Reese said, "There's something else." She looked at him. "Your grandfather," he said. "Elliot Whitmore." She was very still. "There's a silent investment partnership." He pulled a single folded page from the inside pocket of his jacket, separate from the envelope, kept apart deliberately. "A West Coast development group. Established 19 years ago. Your grandfather was a founding equity partner." He placed the page on the table. The CO Group's American holding structure runs through the same development group. A different entry point, restructured twice, but the same foundational entity. Celeste looked at the page. She did not pick it up yet. "Does Madame CO know?" she said. "I don't know," Reese said. "But I think if she did, she would not have called you an asset." He paused. She would have been considerably more careful. Celeste picked up the page. She read it slowly, completely, the way she read everything, giving it the full weight of her attention before she decided what it meant. Then she folded it along its original crease and held it in both hands and sat with what she was feeling, which was not triumph, not yet, but something beneath triumph. Something older and quieter. Her grandfather had taught her to read a room before she could reach the light switch. He had told her once that the most important thing about any space was understanding who built it and why. She was beginning to understand. She placed the page inside the fireproof case alongside everything else. She closed it. She looked at Reese and said, with a steadiness that had cost her nothing because it was simply what she was made of, "I'm going to need an architect's access to everything the CO Group has built on this side of the world." Reese looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "That's why I'm here." The text came on a Tuesday evening, 3 weeks after the photograph. Celeste was at her drafting table, the one she had moved from the Silver Lake house to the spare bedroom of her current rental the week she left, because the drafting table was hers in a way that nothing else in that house had ultimately turned out to be. Nia and Juno were asleep. The apartment was quiet with the particular quality of quiet that belongs to mothers of newborns, not peaceful, not restful, but suspended, the silence of someone who is always partly listening even when nothing is being said. The number was Korean. She didn't recognize it. She almost didn't open it. "My name is Yuna Beck. I got this number from a source I trust, and Jaewon does not know I have it." I understand if you don't respond. But I need to tell you something, and I need you to know I am telling you because I believe it is right, not because anyone asked me to. Celeste read it once. Then she set the phone face up on the drafting table and looked at it the way she had looked at the photograph, with the full, unrushed attention of a woman who understood that how you read something in the first moments determines everything about what you do with it next. She had thought about Una Beck. She would not pretend otherwise. She had thought about her in the specific and complicated way you think about someone who is occupying a position in your life's architecture that you did not know was available, with something that was not quite anger and not quite grief, but lived in the territory between them. She had been careful not to land on a simple feeling about Una, because simple feelings were almost always wrong about complicated situations, and Celeste Whitmore had not survived everything she had survived by being wrong about the materials she was working with. She typed back, "I'm here." The response came within a minute, which meant Una had been holding her phone, waiting, which meant this had cost her something to send. "I was told the relationship before me was brief. Mutually concluded. I was told there were no children." Celeste read that twice. The particular coldness of it, not the words themselves, but the machinery they revealed. Someone had constructed a version of events and delivered it to this woman with enough confidence and enough detail that she had believed it. Had accepted a ring and planned a future and stood in a champagne silk dress at a gala on the other side of the world while believing, genuinely believing, that there was nothing and no one she was standing on top of. She thought about what it meant that the CO family had considered it necessary to erase Nia and Juno entirely. Not minimize. Not reframe. Erase. Her children had been made to not exist in the story this woman had been told, which meant they had understood, Madame CO had understood, that their existence was the one detail that could not be managed with language. Only with removal. She typed, "There are 2 children. A girl and a boy. They are 6 weeks old. They were born premature, and they are healthy, and they are here, and they have always been here." The pause before Una's next message was long enough that Celeste put the phone down and picked up her pencil and made 3 marks on the drawing she had been working on before the notification came. Then the phone moved. "I didn't know." A pause. Then, "I want you to know that I did not know." Celeste believed her. Not because she was naive. She had spent a month dismantling every assumption she had ever made about the people inside Jaewon's world, but because the message read the way things read when they were true. No performance in it. No strategy she could detect. Just a woman sitting somewhere in Seoul on a Tuesday evening holding a phone and trying to say something honest across a distance that should have made honesty impossible. She thought about what Reese had told her. She thought about the assessment document and the 3 criteria and the way the Beck family had been evaluated and selected before Una had known she was being considered for anything. She thought about champagne silk and a diamond commissioned 4 months before it was presented as spontaneous, and the body language of 2 people whose ease together had been managed and arranged and called love. Una Beck had not done this to her. Una Beck had been done to, in a different register, by the same machinery. That did not make them the same. Their situations were not the same, and Celeste was not going to collapse a real and significant difference into a tidy narrative of shared victimhood because it would feel cleaner. But it meant something. It meant the most powerful move available was not the obvious one. She picked up the phone. She typed carefully, the way she wrote every important thing, with precision, with intention, with a clear understanding of what she needed the words to do. "Come to Los Angeles. I'll show you the house I designed for him. Bring your phone. Come prepared to see everything." She set the phone down. She looked at the drafting table. She picked up her pencil. Then she went back to work. She went back to work on a Monday. Not because she was ready in the way people meant when they asked if she was ready, with the implication that readiness was a feeling, something warm and settled that arrived when the hardest part was over. The hardest part was not over. She understood that clearly. But Celeste had learned early in her career that the worst thing you could do to a wounded structure was leave it unattended. Damage spread in stillness. What could be stabilized became catastrophic if you walked away and waited for a better moment to begin. So she went back. Not as distraction. As infrastructure. Priya had kept the firm running during the 5 weeks since the twins came, fielding calls, managing the 2 active projects, holding the professional face of Whitmore Design steady, while Celeste's personal life was doing what it was doing. Priya was exceptional at this. She was the kind of business partner who understood instinctively which fires needed water and which needed to be left alone to burn themselves out. And she had managed the past 5 weeks with the quiet confidence of someone who had decided that the best thing she could do for Celeste right now was make sure there was still something solid to come back to. Celeste came back to it and immediately began taking it apart. Not destroying it. Reading it. She pulled every client file from the past 3 years, and she laid them out, not physically. The office wasn't large enough. But in the project management system she had built herself, because the available software never quite mapped to the way her mind organized information. She went through every commission, every referral source, every introduction that had brought a new client into her professional orbit, and she mapped them against the timeline Reese had given her. The picture that emerged was more extensive than she had wanted it to be. 11 clients, not 311, had entered her portfolio through channels that connected, directly or at one remove, to the CO Group's West Coast network. Some were obvious in retrospect. The tech founder in Malibu. The media executive. The retail developer whose portfolio had become her firm's largest single account. Others were less direct. Introductions made through people who had been introduced through people, the kind of chain that looked like organic professional growth until you laid it against a parallel document that showed you the machinery underneath. She did not feel anger about this, exactly. What she felt was the particular, clarifying fury of an architect who discovers that a structure she believed she had built independently was quietly using load-bearing walls she hadn't specified and didn't own. The work was still hers. The quality of it was hers. The reputation was hers. She had earned every word of it with the precision and care she brought to every square foot of every space she had ever touched. But the access. The rooms. The introductions that had made the work findable by the right people at the right time. That had been managed. Arranged. Given and withheld according to a timeline she had never been shown. She made 2 lists. The first was the 11 CO-connected clients, organized by degree of connection and current project status. The second was every client in her portfolio whose relationship with her firm had originated entirely independently, through her own reputation, her own work, her own professional relationships that predated J1CO by years. The second list was longer than she had feared it might be. That studied her. She was still a real thing. The firm was still a real thing. It had been used, but it had not been built by the using. It had been built by her, in the hours before dawn and the weekends and the years of work that had nothing to do with anyone's West Coast expansion strategy. That was the foundation. She would build from there. While she mapped the firm's architecture, Dorian was doing something else in the apartment's second bedroom, which he had quietly converted into a working space during the 2 weeks since his flight from Virginia had landed. He had sourced a forensic financial attorney through his military network, a woman named Claire Ashworth who had spent 12 years in the Department of Justice before going private and who had, according to Dorian's research, never once lost a case involving concealed assets and fraudulent misrepresentation of a personal relationship's legal standing. Celeste had met with Claire once, briefly, over video call. Claire had asked 4 questions, listened to the answers without expression, and said, "We'll file for paternity establishment and full asset disclosure simultaneously. I want the legal record to exist before they have time to restructure anything." Then she had asked, "Is there anything else I should know about the family's financial architecture?" Celeste had looked at the camera. She had thought about the development group and her grandfather's name on a founding document and the way one structure connected to another if you knew where to look. "Yes," she had said. "Give me 2 more weeks." She turned back to her drafting table. She picked up her pencil. Outside, the Los Angeles afternoon was doing what it did, generous with light, indifferent to everything happening beneath it. She began to draw. She sent the message on a Wednesday morning, 6 weeks after the photograph. 1 line. No preamble, no explanation, no courtesy language designed to make the recipient comfortable. Celeste had spent enough years communicating with powerful people to understand that the most unsettling thing you could put in a message was confidence that didn't feel the need to justify itself. I finished the designs. I thought you'd like to see what I'm building. Thursday, noon. I'll come to you. She sent it through the intermediary channel Reese had identified, the private communications layer Madame CO used for correspondence. She did not want passing through the CO group's monitored internal systems. The fact that Celeste knew that channel existed would register before the message content did. She intended it that way. The response came in 40 minutes. Thursday, the CO Meridian. Private dining room, 14th floor. Noon. Celeste read it and noted two things. The speed, which told her Madame CO had been anticipating contact and had a response prepared. And the location, the CO Meridian Hotel, West Hollywood, the flagship of the CO Group's American hospitality portfolio. A building chosen deliberately, the way all of Madame CO's choices were made deliberately. She wanted Celeste to walk into a space that announced, from the lobby upward, exactly who held the weight in this city. What Madame CO did not know was that Celeste had designed 14 of that building's interior spaces over a period of 22 months. The private dining room on the 14th floor included. She knew where every camera was positioned. She knew which chair at the main table caught the afternoon light in a way that made the person sitting in it appear slightly diminished, washed out, flattened, and which chair did the opposite. She had specified those light sources herself. She knew this room the way she knew every room she had ever built, from the inside, completely, in the particular way that belonged only to the person who had designed it. She chose her chair accordingly. She arrived 7 minutes early and was seated before Madame CO's private elevator reached the 14th floor. When Hyunja CO entered the room, she found Celeste already there, already still, a glass of water in front of her and a plain portfolio on the table and an expression that gave the entrance absolutely nothing to land on. Madame CO absorbed this without visible reaction. She was extraordinary at that, receiving information that disrupted her expectations and returning a surface that showed nothing of the disruption underneath. She was dressed in charcoal and ivory, her posture the architectural precision of a woman who had never once in her adult life allowed her spine to communicate uncertainty. She took the chair across from Celeste, the chair Celeste had left available for her, the one that caught the afternoon light pearly. She looked at Celeste for a moment with the particular attention of a woman who was recalibrating a prior assessment. Then she said, "You're not what I expected." "I know," Celeste said. "That's been useful." A server came. Madame CO ordered tea with the ease of someone in their own home, which was, Celeste understood, the intended effect of the location. Celeste ordered nothing additional. She was not here to be comfortable, and she was not going to perform comfort she didn't feel. "You designed this room," Madame CO said. It was not a question. "I designed 14 rooms in this building," Celeste said. "This one I'm particularly familiar with." Something moved briefly behind Madame CO's eyes. Celeste noted it and moved on. She opened the portfolio. She did not turn it toward Madame CO immediately. She looked at the first page herself for a moment, the way she looked at a finished drawing before she presented it to a client, the final private check of someone who has built something and is certain of its integrity before it enters the world. Then she laid the first document on the table between them. It was the founding equity documentation for her grandfather's investment partnership, Elliot Whitmore's name on a 19-year-old agreement that connected, through 2 restructurings and 4 legal entities, to the foundational architecture of the CO Group's American holdings. She had spent 3 weeks with Claire Ashworth tracing every restructuring, every entity change, every attempt to bury the connection deeper inside the legal structure. The connection held. It was unimpeachable. It was, Claire had told her, the kind of document that did not become less true the more people tried to make it disappear. She watched Madame CO read it. She watched the moment the content registered, not in an expression. Hyunja CO did not give expressions, but in the almost imperceptible stillness that fell over her, the way a building goes quiet in the seconds before something structural shifts. She placed the second document beside the first. The legal memo. 31 months old. The current Los Angeles arrangement. The timeline. The asset language. All of it laid out in the clean, organized sequence of someone who had spent 6 weeks building a case the way she built every structure, from the foundation up, load-bearing elements first. The third document she placed without comment was a single-page summary prepared by Claire Ashworth outlining the legal basis for a full disclosure claim against the CO Group's American holdings, grounded in the Whitmore equity stake and supported by evidence of deliberate concealment over 19 years. Madame CO looked at the 3 documents arranged on the table. Her tea arrived. She did not reach for it. The silence between them was the most expensive silence Celeste had ever sat inside. She let it run. She had designed enough rooms to understand that silence was not empty, it was structural. It held weight. And right now it was holding the full weight of everything Madame CO was recalculating. Finally, Madame CO looked up. Her composure was intact. It was a remarkable thing to witness. The discipline of a woman who had built a 50-year fortress from sheer will and was not going to allow a single stone of it to show damage in front of a witness. "What do you want?" she said. Celeste closed the portfolio. She picked up her water glass, took one measured sip, and set it down. "I want my children recognized," she said. "I want the equity position my grandfather built honored in full. And I want the CO Group's American restructuring history reviewed by an independent authority." She paused. "What I do not want is a negotiation. These are not opening positions. They are the design." She stood. She straightened her jacket. She picked up the portfolio. The documents she left on the table were copies, originals filed in 3 separate locations Claire had specified, and she looked at Madame CO one final time. "I'll see myself out," she said. "I know the building." She left before the dessert course was offered. She walked to the elevator with the unhurried stride of a woman who had just presented her finest work and had no doubt whatsoever about its structural integrity. Behind her, in a room she had built, Madame Hyunja sat alone with 3 documents and a cup of tea going cold and the particular, unfamiliar sensation of a woman who has just understood that she misread the material she was working with. Completely. From the beginning. He came on a Sunday evening, 3 days after the hotel meeting. No advance message. No attorney's letter announcing his intention to visit. Just a knock at the door at 7:15, quiet, even, the knock of a man who was not sure he had the right to make noise and had come anyway because not coming had become something he could no longer manage. Celeste looked through the window beside the door before she opened it. He was alone. No security, no driver waiting at the curb, no infrastructure of any kind around him. He was wearing dark trousers and a plain white shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow, clothes that were not a performance, not a costuming of authority or composure. He looked like a man who had gotten dressed in the dark and driven across the city before he could talk himself out of it. She opened the door. He looked at her and said nothing for a moment. He took in the apartment the way people always took in spaces Celeste inhabited, with the subtle, involuntary shift of someone whose nervous system had just been told something true about the person who lived there. It was smaller than the Silver Lake house. It held more of her. "I'm not here from my mother," he said. "I'm not here from counsel." "I know," she said. "If you were, you wouldn't have knocked like that." She did not invite him in immediately. She stood in the doorway and looked at him with the full, unguarded attention she had spent 3 years giving him and had recently reclaimed entirely for herself, not as a gift, but as an assessment. She was reading the material, determining what it was now, not what she had once believed it could become. What she saw was a man who had been taken apart by something and had not yet decided how to reassemble himself. The architectural precision that had always defined how he occupied space, the deliberate posture, the controlled stillness, was present but effortful in a way it had never visibly been before. He was holding himself together consciously. The scaffolding was showing. She stepped back and let him in. He stood in the center of the living room and looked at the twins asleep in the double bassinet by the window. He looked at them for a long time without speaking. Something moved across his face that had no name in the language he used for business, something unmanaged and real and painful to witness, because it arrived too late to be the thing it should have been from the beginning. She let him look. She did not fill the silence. When he turned back to her, his eyes held the particular rawness of a man who has spent several days in a confrontation with himself that he did not win. "I know what the documents say," he said. "I know what my mother called you. I know about the timeline. I know about the memo." He paused. "Reese told me what he gave you before he resigned. I'm not here to dispute any of it." "Then why are you here?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said the only true thing he had said in months. She knew it was true the way she knew true things, not from warmth or hope, but from the specific quality of stillness that accompanied it. The stillness of a man who has stopped performing and is simply, finally, speaking from the place the performance had been covering. "I don't know how to be what I was built to be," he said, "and also be what you deserved. I have spent 3 years believing those two things could exist in the same space." He looked at the window. "They cannot. I understood that too late. And I am aware that understanding it now is worth very little to you." The room was quiet. Nia made a small sound and settled. Juno's hand opened and closed in the slow, instinctive rhythm of sleeping infants. Celeste looked at this man she had loved with the open, evidence-based generosity of a woman who believed in the potential of difficult structures. She looked at him and she felt, moving through her in one long slow wave, the full grief of it, not just the betrayal, but the specific loss of the version of him she had built in good faith from the materials he had given her. That version had been real to her. Its dismantling cost something real. She did not look away from that cost. She did not rush through it. Then the wave passed. And what was left was simply clarity. "Do you want to know your children?" she said. He looked at the bassinet. When he looked back at her, his jaw was tight with the effort of holding himself level. "Yes," he said. It was one word. It carried the weight of every wrong thing that had made it necessary to ask. "Then that," she said, "is the only conversation we are having tonight. Everything else, the equity, the legal filings, the custody structure, goes through Claire Ashworth. You have her contact information." She paused. "But if you want to know Nia and Juno, that conversation happens directly. With me. On my timeline. Beginning with the fact that they will know exactly who their mother is and exactly what she built and exactly what it cost her." He nodded. "Once. The nod of a man accepting terms he has no right to negotiate." She crossed the room and lifted Nia carefully from the bassinet, warm, small, smelling of the particular sweetness of sleeping infants, and she turned and held her daughter out to him. He took her with both hands, slowly, with the terrified tenderness of someone handling something they understand is precious and fragile and entirely undeserved. He looked down at her face. Nia's eyes stayed closed. Her mouth made the small, searching movement of a baby deep in a dream about something warm. Celeste watched him hold his daughter. She felt nothing she hadn't already accounted for. She had mapped this moment the way she mapped every difficult space, had walked through it in advance, had identified where it would be hardest to remain standing, had decided beforehand what it meant and what it did not mean. It did not mean forgiveness. It did not mean return. It did not mean the wound was smaller than it was. It meant she was choosing, with full information and clear eyes, who she was going to be in this particular room. On this particular evening. In this life that was entirely, finally, structurally hers. She went to the kitchen. She put the kettle on. She stood at the counter and breathed, slow and even, while in the next room the man who had called her an arrangement held his daughter for the first time and began, perhaps, to understand the full dimension of what that word had cost him. She did not cry, but she allowed herself to feel the full weight of not crying. That felt important. That felt like something she had earned. The kettle began to heat. Outside, Los Angeles moved through its Sunday evening, indifferent and golden, unbothered as always by what people were surviving inside its light. She stayed in the kitchen until she was ready. Then she went back in. 18 months is not a long time. It is long enough, Celeste had learned, to rebuild everything that matters from the foundation up, if you're precise about what you are building, honest about what the old structure actually was, and willing to do the work in the hours before anyone else is awake. In the quiet that belongs only to people who have decided that what they are building is worth the cost of building it. She stood now in the newest space she had ever designed. Her own studio, not a rented office, not a shared floor in someone else's building, not a space made possible by a network she hadn't fully understood she was borrowing. A downtown Los Angeles building she had purchased outright, 6 floors of converted industrial architecture that she had stripped back to its bones and rebuilt with the particular intention of someone who understood, at a cellular level, what it meant to design a space that told the truth about the person inside it. Nia was on her hip. Juno was pulling at her sleeve with the focused, joyful persistence of an 18-month-old who had recently discovered that the world responded to his insistence and found this information enormously satisfying. The late afternoon light was coming through the floor-to-ceiling windows she had specified herself, south-facing, frameless, designed to catch the specific quality of Los Angeles light that arrived at this hour and turned everything it touched into something worth looking at. She had always known that the right light did not make you feel watched. It made you feel seen. There was a difference she had spent her entire career trying to explain to clients who didn't yet understand it. Standing here now, in this light, with her children and her name above the door and the full, unencumbered reality of everything she had built without anyone's permission or assistance or strategic management, she understood it more completely than she ever had before. The firm had been restructured 8 months ago. New holding entity, her name only, no prior network dependencies. The 11 CO-connected clients had been handled individually, and with the same professionalism she applied to everything. Some relationships ended cleanly, others restructured on terms she controlled. The remaining client list was built entirely on the merit of work that had, in the past 12 months, won 2 international design awards and been featured in 3 publications that had never previously known her name. She had built it before. She knew how to build it again. This time she knew exactly what was hers. Nia and Juno were legally recognized CO heirs. The custody arrangement was Celeste's architecture, drawn by her, filed by Claire Ashworth, signed by J1 without revision, because the terms were fair in a way that made the alternative an embarrassment. He saw them on the schedule she had designed. He arrived when she said to arrive, and he left when the time was finished, and he had not once, in 18 months, attempted to renegotiate anything. She did not know whether this was genuine respect for the boundary or simply the behavior of a man who understood he had no standing to push. She had decided it did not matter. The boundary held. That was what boundaries were for. Una Beck had not married him. She had ended the engagement quietly, 4 months after her visit to Los Angeles, and relocated to London where she was, according to the single message she had sent Celeste upon arriving, beginning to figure out what she actually wanted from her life rather than what had been decided for her. Celeste had written back 2 sentences. She wished her well, and she meant it. Every year on the twins' birthday a card arrived from a London postmark. No message inside. Just Una's name in clean, careful script. Celeste kept them in the fireproof case alongside everything else, the documents, the timeline, the attorney's card, the founding equity papers with her grandfather's name on them. The fireproof case lived under her desk now. She had moved it from the kitchen when she moved into the studio. It felt right to keep it close while she worked. Not as a wound to return to, as a foundation document. The record of what the structure had actually been before she redesigned it into what it was now. Madame Hyunja Seo had not attended the regulatory inquiry proceedings. She had sent attorneys. The inquiry into the CO Group's West Coast Holdings restructuring history was ongoing, patient, thorough, the kind of process that moved at the speed of institutional accountability rather than personal urgency. Celeste did not track it closely. She had filed what she had, provided what Claire required, and returned her attention to her own work. Watching Madame Seo face consequences was not the thing that was going to give her what she needed. She had understood that clearly enough to stop waiting for it to feel like enough. Juno tugged her sleeve again. She looked down at him, his father's bone structure, her absolute refusal to be overlooked, and she felt the particular, unglamorous, overwhelming love of a mother who has fought for something and won and is now standing inside the winning, which looks nothing like you imagined and is better than you imagined and is also just Tuesday, just the light through the windows, just her son pulling her sleeve and her daughter heavy and warm on her hip. She reached into her jacket pocket with her free hand and found, by touch, the folded note she had carried there every day for 14 months. Her grandfather's handwriting on a single sheet of paper, soft now at the creases from the number of times she had unfolded and refolded it. She didn't need to open it. She knew every word. I taught you to read a room before you could reach the light switch, baby girl. Every space tells you the truth if you know what to ask it. Ask the right questions. Build the right things. The rest takes care of itself. She looked at her studio. Her children. Her name above the door in the late Los Angeles light. She thought of the caption. A union years in the making. She thought of the kitchen island at 6 in the morning and the photograph and the notepad and the first word she had written and circled. Architecture. She had read the room. She had asked the right questions. She had built the right things. And this, all of this, every square foot of it, was what she had built.